On today's Locked On Nationals, we are joined by Bobby Blanco from MASN Sports.com. And if you did not see this yesterday, John Morosi from MLB Network said that the Nationals have had closer Kyle Finnegan in trade talks this offseason. But the bigger question should be should the Nationals decide to trade Kyle Finnegan now or this upcoming deadline?
You are Locked On Nationals, your daily Washington Nationals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, I'm your host, Ryan Clary. You can catch me over on Twitter at RyanClary11 and as well as our show page at LO_Nationals for all your latest Nationals news and notes. Check us out over on Twitter. And while you're at it, search up Locked On Nationals wherever you get your podcast, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, and of course, over on YouTube as well. Search Locked On Nationals and hit that subscriber button, please. And on today's show, we are joined by Bobby Blanco, per usual, usually about once a week on this program. Huh? What are you saying? Yeah, once a week appointment. You know, we have to talk Nats here, and we're in this thing together, covering the Nationals, talking about them every single day. But Bobby, we're going to be getting into some of these Kyle Finnegan trade talks because I think this has been wildly interesting. And then later on in today's show, we'll talk about which veteran we see the Nationals kind of moving off of this offseason, whether it be DFA, cut, or via trade. So before we get into it, though, Bobby, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, and new customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, Bobby, first and foremost, how are you?
I'm doing great. I don't know if you can tell because I keep my background blurry, but I'm back in my new, better setup. I've moved rooms in my house, so I've got my podcasting mic and arm back. I got my mixer set up, so headphones back on. So hopefully this audio is coming in clearer for your listeners, both on YouTube and then your podcasting platforms. But yeah, doing pretty well. It's finally cold out.
Yeah, it is cold.
A little more like the holidays. Thanksgiving's a week away from today, so let's get into the holiday spirit. I'm liking that. Got a bunch of firewood, ready to light some fires. Get some.
There we go.
Cozy
and
weather.
Of course, you guys are also getting ready to welcome in Baby Blanco. I mean, that's going to be
not bedroom. He's not going to sleep in here, but like his closet, essentially. The reason it's blurred is because right behind me is a bunch of baby stuff, and his closet's wide open. So, yep,
Baby Blanco is on the way.
So close, like 3 weeks.
There we go. We go. We're happy for you guys, man. So, speaking of being happy, some Nationals fans might be happy about trading Kyle Finnegan? ? But Bobby, I want to get your thoughts on this. Should the Nats trade Kyle Finnegan now? Is now the right time to trade your all-star closer?
I think, I actually didn't see that John Morosi report you mentioned at the top of the show. So I don't know exactly how he phrased it. If it's more like Mike Rizzo has received phone calls about Kyle Finnegan, is just hearing other teams out.
Let me jump in because let me lay the groundwork for it because he did say that he's been in trade talks this offseason. There wasn't really he's received calls or Mike Rizzo's been calling teams about the possibility of trading. It just said that he's been in trade talks this offseason. So whatever that means, whether the Nationals are reaching out to a team or teams are reaching out to the Nationals about Finnegan, that's just kind of what it is. But continue.
So to me, that phrasing is different than the Nationals are shopping Kyle Finnegan. To me, that means teams are calling Mike Rizzo asking about, is Kyle Finnegan available in a trade? Which is very different. And then I think one, if I'm a Nationals fan who wants to see Kyle Finnegan back on this roster or pitching for the Nationals next year, I'm not too concerned because I think Mike Rizzo's just doing his due diligence. Of course, he's going to listen to phone calls again about Kyle Finnegan. This will, he's done so for the past 2 trade deadlines. You'll probably hear a lot over this offseason at the winter meetings in a month or actually in a couple of weeks. And then obviously heading into next year's trade deadline if Kyle remains healthy and productive. So I would say that sounds more like other teams are just, poking around, seeing what's available. We've already seen a couple of minor trades this past week. I think the Cubs required like a middle bullpen relief arm from somebody. So, it's not like the hot stove is burning, but there are been some minor moves already, including the bullpen. So it's no wonder that this has popped up recently. But if I'm the Nationals, I'm not trading Kyle Finnegan this offseason unless I get blown away by an offer. I don't know which team if any team would actually blow away Mike Rizzo for Kyle Finnegan. No offense to Kyle right now. I think he's 31 years old. He had a solid season last year, but once again, I think for like the second or third year in a row, he kind of faded near the end of the year. So, his value is only but each passing day, his value is only going to go down until the trade deadline, where if he's like pitching at an all-star level, but remember, he was an all-star last year, then it's going to be high again. But again, they fielded calls that, a couple months ago at the deadline, didn't move him. That's probably when they would have gotten the biggest return for him. And they decided not to move him. So I would expect Kyle to start the season in a Nationals uniform as their closer. And then we'll go from there and see how it goes. And you know what? Maybe the Nationals are good enough next year where they're not looking to trade Kyle Finnegan at the deadline. They're looking to acquire players at the deadline. So you could see Kyle finish out his contract. I believe he's a free agent after next season. In a Nationals uniform. All that stuff is possible.
I saw this the other day, and Kyle Finnegan's set to make right around $8.5 million with one of his final ARB years here in DC. And someone brought this up to me, actually, and I thought it was a really smart point, that the Nationals could just be looking to kind of move off that because they might not see the worth in paying Kyle Finnegan $8.5 million this year. Because here's the thing with Finnegan, he was an all-star. Kyle Finnegan, we all know this, whatever it is in the summer, whatever he does, I don't know if it's some warm weather that brings it out of him. The last 2 seasons, this guy has been locked down as a closer in the summer months. So that right then and there is great. But also there's a track record of him completely falling off. And always the first few weeks of the season, he's awful. And then the last few weeks, really the last month or two of the season, he's not great as well. I think at this point in time, though, my frustration is this. Why haven't the Nationals traded Kyle Finnegan this past deadline when teams were calling about Kyle Finnegan, when he was just an all-star, when his value was at the highest that it is? And if the Nationals do decide to trade him now, what are you doing? This, in my opinion, makes no sense whatsoever. If you're going to trade Kyle Finnegan now, then obviously we all know this. They were at this deadline not necessarily shopping him. I don't know if they're the ones calling teams about Finnegan, but there were certainly teams calling in to try and trade for Kyle Finnegan. If you have a good bullpen arm and then you are a losing team, which the Nationals were this past year, surprise, but you're going to be getting calls on your bullpen pieces as you trade away Hunter Harvey, you trade away Dylan Floro. I mean, my frustration is this. Your value for Kyle Finnegan was never higher than what it was at this past year's deadline. And now if you're deciding to shop him this offseason, you're going to be getting less overall. And so I just feel as if, let's say they took the best offer at this past deadline for Finnegan. It's going to be more inevitably than what it was sitting here today. So if the Nationals do decide to go and trade him, my frustration is just why? The timing does not make sense because you do go into this season, which at this point in time on November 21st, we expect the Nationals to maybe compete and certainly be better than what they were this past season in the past 2 years. But the timing of this is just so frustrating, in my opinion, Bobby. Why would they decide to move him now and not this past deadline? It just does not make sense.
Well, again, I think that's why the phrasing of the report is important, because it sounds like instead of the Nationals shopping Kyle Finnegan, calling other teams, being who wants Kyle Finnegan, it's other teams calling Mike Rizzo, asking if he's available. So one, I would say, I think the frustrations can be quelled a little bit on that front. But if they do make the move, eventually, in the coming weeks at the winter meetings, whatever it may be, then yeah, I agree with you. I think there could be some level of questioning there. And frustration maybe among the fan base of, well, if you're going to do it in the offseason, why didn't you just do it in July? And again, I think that's very unlikely. I think a team would have to severely overpay and probably equal what the Nationals would have gotten at the deadline, or wanted at the deadline, or come very close to it if they're going to move him this offseason. So again, I just think the phrasing from what you said about the report is different. It's not the Nationals looking to move on from Kyle Finnegan. It's other teams just seeing if he's available. Other teams knowing that the Nationals, on the surface aren't very good. Question marks going into next year. Are they going to be competitive or not? Who knows? But Kyle Finnegan does have a good track record, like you said, of starting the season off very strong, and maybe another team can, with a stronger, more balanced bullpen, can ease his workload a bit. He pitched over 60 innings last year, and then you can kind of space out that production over the course of a full season. So again, I think it's just teams looking, teams asking, making maybe plans, and just seeing. And I think it's Mike Rizzo's job to answer the phone, hear other teams out, and if they say, well, what it'll take, he's gonna be like, well, it's gonna take at least 3 prospects, and one of them being one of your top guys, and maybe even a major league reliever, because they are going to be missing one of their top relief pitchers, and they're going to need to fill a spot on the roster for that.
Yeah, I'm in between a rock and a hard place at this point with trading Finnegan, because it's like Finnegan, like if you have him in the back of your bullpen, like that he's going to be relatively consistent. Like you do know that he will be solid and at least above average. I mean, the guy was an all-star this last year. And while, yes, people did opt out, but like getting into the point, like my frustration is not really with trading Finnegan. Like I would have no problem with the Nationals trading Finnegan. The problem is the timing of it. Like if you were going to shop him, this past deadline would have been the right time for it. And I just can't get past that. So anyways, we'll move on from the Kyle Finnegan talk, because on tomorrow's show, I'm definitely going to pop off if I see another rumor about Kyle Finnegan, and I'll just have my little Ryan rant.
I will next if Kyle Finnegan gets traded this offseason, I think we should just dedicate a full show of you just going on a rant of why that's incorrect, and I think you'll be well deserved to do so. Yeah,
and I will, because you know what? It's baseball offseason. It's going to be a long one. The Nationals will either make me very happy this offseason, or they'll just frustrate me to no end. So we'll just see what happens. But I think it could be due for a little bit of a rant. So we'll see what happens. But ultimately, I do want to get into this, because speaking of making moves, kind of just brought this up. Which veteran Nat would we consider trading / moving off of this offseason? I've got an answer. It may surprise you, Bobby, but I'm going to hear yours as well. Before we get into it, though, I'm going to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel, and get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So you get a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch, and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Now we get back into it with Bobby Blanco from MASNsports.com, and catch his work on Twitter as well at Bobby_Blanco. Bobby, we talked about this yesterday. You already know my answer with this, with which veteran Nat that you would consider trading / moving off from this offseason, but I want to hear yours first. Who would you consider trading this offseason or moving on from this offseason?
Yeah, it's tough because, one, there aren't a lot of veterans on this team, and that's by design, of course. It's a young squad, and a lot of young pieces that the Nationals are hoping are going to be part of their next veteran group that compete for a World Series. So it's slim pickings when it comes to actually finding veterans. I've got a couple of options for us. I got 3. You want to hear all 3?
You want to hear?
I can run through them real quick. All right. I got 2 position players and 2 relievers, and one of them is not, and Kyle Finnegan is neither of them. Okay. My position player is actually Alex Call, a guy who is by major league standards not that old. I mean, technically he's a veteran, He's appeared in parts of 3 seasons in the majors, but he is 30 years old. Of course, the Nationals, I think, were just claimed him off waivers from the Guardians years ago in 2022. He's under team control for, another 3 seasons. So I think this is going to be his first year. No, actually, after next year is his first year of arbitration eligibility. So you got team control, and he plays an outfield where the Nationals have so much depth, and you are expecting the likes of James Wood and Dylan Cruz and Jacob Young to be your starters out there. You're expecting Robert Hassel III to hopefully make his major league debut this year. I just don't see a spot for a 30-year-old outfielder that's only played, has made just over 200 games, 205 games over 3 years. And I would say that his value as a major leaguer has never been higher, because while it was only 30 games, he had his best 30-game stretch of his major league career to end the season last year, hitting over 300, an OPS near 1,000, a handful of extra base hits, 14 RBIs, and solid defense. We've seen Alex Call make some crazy plays in the outfield because he just does not care about his body. He will dive for any ball, and he dives headfirst.
I love that about him too.
Right. So I think there's some value there. I'm not saying you're going to get a top prospect. You're probably not even going to get a top 30 prospect, but you can maybe add to your pitching depth, or maybe you can add to your infielding depth in the minor league system by trading Alex Call, who you figure won't land into your future plans with all the young outfielders you have coming up and are going to be mainstays for years to come. So you could essentially see it as it's a gain, because it's a waiver claim that you're going to get prospects back and forth. So it's like it's a net positive for the Nationals if they decided to trade him and if they found a partner willing to take him on. My 2 relievers would be Robert Garcia, again, kind of older, nearing 30 years old, a lefty. Some team might need a lefty. The only negative there is that would leave Jose A. Ferrer as the only lefty in the bullpen. Robert has had some good spots occasionally. Overall, the numbers aren't fantastic, under team control. But again, close to a 30-year-old reliever. I'm not quite sure if, how much more time his arm has. And maybe you can just, again, get a lower level prospect, just keep adding depth to that farm system. And then the last one, which I think is actually a pretty good one, especially for a trade, Tanner Rainey. If you're going to hold on to Kyle Finnegan as your closer, we saw Tanner really struggle for the most part of last year, but he finally put it together near the end of the season and showed the stuff that made him such a revelation back in 2019, 2020. He really coming on as like a great acquisition for the Nationals in that Tanner trade way back, I guess at the winter meeting
2019. Yeah.
So, coming off a serious injury, but this is one of those things where if you trade Kyle Finnegan, you need to hold on to Tanner Rainey and hope he can be your closer. If you hold on to Kyle Finnegan, you don't really need Tanner Rainey because you got Derek Law. We're expecting them to add another arm to the bullpen. You have a Robert Garcia, Jose Ferrer to handle lefties. And then, again, adding depth to the system. Maybe for a Tanner Rainey, you could get a top 30 or like a top 15 pitcher prospect, not just position player overall, but like a solid pitching prospect that might land in your top 30 or just outside of it because of the experience that Tanner has, the velocity that he can get back, and some of the experience that he has had, especially in the postseason back in 2019 as a younger pitcher. But he's also 31. He's going to be 32 in December, on Christmas Day, actually. It looks like his birthday is on Christmas Day. So
nice.
A guy that, is on the wrong side of 30, is coming off an injury, has a little bit of value left in him, but I don't know how much value he has for this particular squad in Washington.
I think those are all 3 like realistic possibilities too. Like my only Tanner Rainey for me, like at this point in time, I'm not ready to marry him as the closer. Like I just think at this point, it was a lot of luck in the last few weeks, last month of the season. And, like Tanner Rainey back in 2019, like I was thinking this guy was going to be the future closer. I mean, he was pumping 99 to 100 pretty damn consistently. I was like, oh, this guy is filthy. He's going to be the guy. And then we all know what happened. Fell off, Tommy John surgery. And but he did look good. Like I will say, like he looked a lot better in the second half of this season than what I expected. I think all the other Robert Garcia would be a solid trade option. Like a team like the Dodgers or like the Rays, I feel like they'd look at Robert Garcia and they'd give up one of their later prospects. I mean, you would not get much for him in return, but still, it's depth in the farm system that could help you make a trade.
That already has a lot of bullpen options that Robert doesn't need to do a whole lot there, but can absolutely help.
Yeah, and they can hone in on that and just be like, you're going to come in and you're going to go up against lefties and you're going to get a lot of ground balls or whatever it is that Garcia would do well. I mean, and Alex Call as well. I've always loved Alex Call. Like, I just think, like, I look back last year in 2023 when Alex Call first got called up. And, I mean, he was really good as a leadoff guy for a while. And then the Nationals did eventually make the move to C.J. Abrams, and that was a lot better. But still, I think Alex Call has always kind of been a slept-on player. Like, I do think he is a major league caliber player. I don't think he's going to be a starter anywhere, really. But, like, he's a great fourth outfielder option. Really good defensively. I mean, he's going to put his body on the line. He's a smart baseball player overall, high IQ, and seems to come up in some pretty big moments. So I love those answers. I think my answer, though, might throw a wrench in this Nats fan base. I'll tell you that after this. And thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. And Bobby, my answer for who I would consider trading this offseason, the second baseman, Luis Garcia. The reason why I pinpoint Garcia is, number one, it's crazy to think that he is a quote-unquote veteran at this point. He's like 24 years old, but this guy has been around since 2020, since he was like 19, 20 years old. And Luis Garcia is coming off his best season again. When talking about trading guys, you want to trade them at the peak of their value. And I do think sitting here today, Luis Garcia, at this point in his career, has never had a higher value. He's under team control for the next few seasons as well. Luis Garcia is still young, 24 years old, and the guy is a legit solid hitter. And he hasn't really put it all together, but in the second half of the season especially, he did put it all together, and he was the Nationals' best offensive piece in 2024. Now, things would have to happen if you were to trade Luis Garcia. Number one, the return would have to be right. You'd have to be getting someone who, in my opinion, is going to help you now up in the majors, whether it's a prospect who's in AAA, who's been killing it and ready to make the jump, or if it's a starting pitcher, whatever it is, it's going to have to be someone that will be able to help you now, because Garcia is certainly going to help you down the road at this now position. But also, you would have to make some signings, whether it's signing an Alex Bregman, or a name, in my opinion, who would come at a cheaper cost, who no one's really talked about, in my opinion, who I think is a little bit interesting, a Gleyber Torres type. If you think that you can make that upgrade and go after Gleyber, who's going to hit a little bit more power, who's going to be a little cheaper than a Bregman, and that'll also allow you to maybe go out there and sign a starting pitcher and kind of, use your money a little wiser. So I think signing like a Gleyber Torres type or an Alex Bregman, that would be a little interesting in my opinion. And Luis Garcia Jr., I think he's fine, but I've also seen a lot of inconsistencies throughout his career that kind of throws me off of the path that I think some Nationals fans think that he is on. Like, I don't think Luis Garcia is as consistent as what he was this last year. Maybe he has put it all together because he did put together a legit top 3 offensive season as far as second basemen go across Major League Baseball. I mean, he was up there. Ketel Marte was by far and away the best offensive second baseman in baseball this year. But right behind that was Jose Altuve, and then right behind Altuve was Luis Garcia. Garcia was really good this year as far as second baseman go and offensive production. So it'd be one of those things where, again, like, if you're the Nationals and if you're Mike Rizzo sitting here today, if you don't think Luis Garcia Jr. is part of this future, then the time to trade him would be now, because I can't bank on him having a great season again and trading him at this deadline if you, number one, aren't in contention, and number two, you just think Garcia isn't as good as what the numbers indicated this past season. So that is my answer. Luis Garcia Jr., I would consider trading him this offseason.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's all very fair and plausible for sure. And I do, looking through this roster, you do have guys that could fill in the second second base spot. Maybe at the level of Luis Garcia, probably not. At least what did he put out this year? But like you have Trey Lipscomb, Jose Tena. Maybe you add somebody. I think third base right now is a bigger question, and maybe even first base too. So for me, I'm not trading Louis just because that just creates another hole in the infield that I would need to fill or plug and play with a guy that is not as proven yet. Darren Baker also on the 40-man now that could maybe play there. But all those guys combined probably don't give you what Luis Garcia Jr. can give you, or at least showed that he can this past year. I agree that I think the best selling point is that his value has never been higher, and maybe a team does need a second baseman to put him over the top. I haven't done my research across the league of who would need that, but I guess they could be out there. So, yeah, I think Louis is definitely possible. He's probably, looking at this roster, he's probably the most valuable trade chip because of everything you said, the experience that he has, the age, the controllability he still has, and the production he just put up this past year. But I think that's a good option in terms of position players, good Lord, and who they could have come up in trade talks if someone were interested.
Yeah, and I think those are all – this is an intriguing topic to really kind of tackle at this point in time. So we'll see what happens. But, Bobby, I always appreciate the time with you, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course.
Maybe we'll not be available next week for Thanksgiving, but the week after that, we'll be happy to jump back.
Exactly. Baseball's going to have to take a back seat to all the food on Thanksgiving. So
what's your favorite Thanksgiving? Go.
Ooh, sweet potato casserole. Not even close.
Stuffing
is great. My mom makes a great stuffing, so I'm excited for that. A little gravy on there, but my favorite bite actually is getting sweet potato casserole, which is filled with brown sugar. It's very unhealthy. I love it.
Oh,
and then of course, exactly. Yeah, it's not supposed to be. And stuffing, gravy, mashed potatoes, and a little bit of dark meat turkey all in one bite. Kind of shove it down your. Oh, I love it. I love that bite. So good. So I cannot wait. Thanksgiving is again a week away, which is crazy. So it'll be fun. I cannot wait. And of course, knowing the Nationals, maybe that's the day that they'll make a huge move. And of course, it'll just throw a wrench in everything we have to do for Thanksgiving. So
please,
that'd be fun. Yeah, please don't do that. Please do not do that. So Thank you all for making Locked On Nats your first listen. You can catch Bobby Blanco on Twitter at Bobby_Blanco and myself, Ryan Clary, at Ryan Clary 11 over on Twitter. We will catch you guys on the flip side. Have a good one. Go Nats.